Welcome to the deep dive. Ready to have your mind blown?
Always up for a good mind-bending session.
Today we're diving into a concept that might just turn your understanding of self totally upside down.
Ooh, sounds intriguing. What's the source material?
It's an excerpt from a book about evolution, and it poses this really wild question. What if the human body is, less of an individual and more of a hold on to your hats, seething colony of symbiotic viruses?
Oh, okay. I'm definitely intrigued now. It really makes you question where one organism ends and another begins, right?
Exactly, and the excerpt jumps right into this mind-blowing fact. You know how we always hear about all the bacteria living inside us?
Oh, yeah. It's like we're more bacteria than human, right?
Well, that's actually kind of true. The excerpt says up to 3/4 of the cells in our bodies aren't even human.
Seriously. That many.
Yep. Mostly bacteria and archaea. But here's the thing. They're not just hanging out in there. They're actively contributing to our survival.
Ah, symbiosis. That classic win-win situation.
Exactly. And the perfect example is, of course, our little cellular powerhouses.
A mitochondria. Oh, I can already tell this is going to be good.
Oh, it gets even wilder. These little energy factories were once, get this, free-living bacteria billions of years ago.
No way. So they were just out there doing their own thing.
Apparently. And then at some point, they teamed up with our ancient ancestors, brought their energy-producing skills to the party, and now we literally can't live without them.
That's insane. So from the very beginning, life has been all about collaboration. And it seems like that collaboration goes way deeper, even down to our genes.
That's exactly where this excerpt takes us. It introduces this idea of verticobacter and horizontobacter. Have you heard of those terms before?
Can't say I have, but the names kind of hint at what they're about, right?
Definitely. Verticobacter are the organisms that are transmitted vertically from parent to offspring, like a family heirloom passed down through generations.
Okay, makes sense. So their success is completely tied to the host's success.
Exactly. They're in it for the long haul. Now, horizontobacter are a different story. They can jump between hosts, spreading however they can.
Oh, so like through coughs or sneezes, even contaminated food or water.
Exactly. They're less concerned with the long-term well-being of any single host. They just need to keep spreading.
So a bacterium that makes you cough uncontrollably to spread itself is a horizontobacter, like the one that causes whooping cough.
Right. It doesn't care if you're miserable as long as it gets to a new host. Pretty ruthless, right?
Definitely. It's a whole different survival strategy. Now, here's where it gets really mind-blowing. The author suggests we apply this same thinking to the genes within an organism.
Wait, so even our own genes can be vertico or horizontal? How does that even work?
Think about it. Your genes are also passed down vertically from one generation to the next. Their success depends on the survival and reproduction of you, the organism they inhabit.
So in a way, my genes are kind of using me as their vehicle to get to the next generation.
Exactly. It's a total shift in perspective, right? But it highlights just how deeply cooperative our own bodies really are. And it makes you question where the self even begins, if even our genes are part of this intricate web.
It's definitely a mind bender. And speaking of mind bending, the excerpt also dives into this wild world of parasitic manipulation.
Oh yes, some parasites have evolved truly bizarre ways to control their hosts. It's like something out of a sci-fi movie.
Like that Gordian worm that drives crickets to jump into water even though it kills them.
Exactly. Talk about a dramatic exit. It's all part of the worm's life cycle, though. Needs the water to reproduce. And it basically hijacks the cricket's brain to get what it needs.
And what about that parasite, Toxoplasma gondii? Doesn't it make rats attracted to cats?
It's one of the most classic examples of parasitic manipulation. This little mind controller wants to end up inside a cat to reproduce. But first, it infects a rodent, like a rat. And get this, it actually makes the infected rat attracted to the smell of cats.
Oh, that's just messed up. So the parasite is orchestrating its own transmission by manipulating the rat's behavior.
Precisely. It's both ingenious and creepy.
Right. Definitely gives a whole new meaning to playing puppet master. This is also fascinating. I could talk about it for hours.
Me too. But maybe we should save some of that parasitic manipulation talk for later. Let's bring it back to us. And this idea of our genes as a type of verticovirus.
Good point. I'm still trying to wrap my head around that one. It's almost like they're all on the same team, all those little genes working towards a common purpose.
That's a great way to think about it. They need each other to succeed. Their fate is completely intertwined with the fate of the organism they inhabit. And that cooperation is a big part of why they're so effective at building a complex body like ours.
It makes sense, but it's still kind of strange to think about. Like, there's a part of me that's still wondering, what about the genes that actually did come from viruses? Are those really part of the same team?
It's a good question. But here's the thing. The key isn't where a gene came from. It's about how it's transmitted and whether its success is tied to the host's success. If it's passed down vertically and its fate is linked to yours, then it's essentially acting like a vertigo entity, no matter its origin.
So even those viral genes that became part of our DNA way back when, they're part of the team now.
Exactly. They've been along for the ride for so long, they're basically part of the same swarm, working together to ensure the survival of you, the organism they call home.
Wow. So really, our bodies are more like these complex ecosystems, all these different entities working together. It's mind-boggling.
It is, isn't it? And it really challenges us to rethink our place in the world.
Yeah.
We're not just individuals, but these interconnected beings shaped by forces way beyond ourselves.
Definitely a lot to chew on.
Absolutely. And I think we've given our listeners plenty to think about for now.
I agree. We'll be back soon to continue our exploration of this fascinating topic, so stay tuned.
Welcome back. I feel like we were just getting to the really good stuff before. Remember we were talking about how our genes, those little snippets of DNA, can almost be seen as a team of vertigo entities working together for this shared goal of, well, keeping us alive and kicking.
Right, right. It's such a cool way to think about it, this whole vertico and horizontal framework. It really expands on that classic idea of symbiosis,
Yeah.
where everyone benefits. But then again, I was thinking, isn't nature a little more complicated than that? Like, what about situations where something's kind of both, vertico and horizontal?
You're totally onto something.
Yeah.
Nature loves to blur the lines. It rarely fits neatly into our little boxes. And there are tons of cases where an organism's strategy might change depending on what's going on around it. Like, have you ever heard of parasitic wasps?
Uh-oh, parasitic wasps. Those always sound a little, well, scary. What do they do?
Well, there are tons of different kinds, but a lot of them lay their eggs inside other insects, usually caterpillars. And this is where things get really interesting. Some of these wasps have developed this incredible way to make sure their babies have plenty to eat.
Okay, I'm listening. Let me guess they manipulate the caterpillar somehow, like brainwashing it.
You got it. But they don't do it directly. They inject a virus along with their eggs.
A virus? Well, hold on. How does that work?
It's a special kind of virus called a polyvirus. And get this, it's actually part of the wasp's genome. It's passed down from parent to offspring, just like any other gene.
Okay, so the wasp is carrying around this virus. It's like part of the family. But I still don't get how that helps the wasp babies.
So once the eggs hatch inside the caterpillar, the virus gets to work. It starts making proteins that shut down the caterpillar's immune system.
Ah, I see. So it's like the virus is giving the wasp larvae a free pass. They can just chow down without the caterpillar fighting back.
Exactly. It's like a secret weapon passed down through generations. And it shows how a virus, something we usually think of as horizontal, can actually be part of this vertigo transmission system.
It's like the virus is doing the dirty work for the wasp, helping its vertigo strategy succeed. Nature is wild.
Totally. And speaking of wild, remember how we talked about how much of our own human genome is actually made up of old viral DNA?
Yeah, that was pretty freaky. Like 8% of our DNA is just leftover bits from ancient viruses.
I know. It makes you think about who we really are, right?
Mm.
But what's even crazier is that some of those viral genes are actually doing stuff for us now. Like important stuff.
Hey, seriously. So these old invaders are now part of the team.
They've basically become domesticated. Over millions of years, our bodies have figured out ways to use them to our advantage. Like, have you ever heard of syncytin?
Rings a bell, but I can't quite place it.
It's this gene that's totally essential for making the placenta in mammals.
Yeah.
You know, that organ that connects the mother and the fetus during pregnancy.
No way. A gene from a virus is involved in making the placenta.
Yep. Scientists think it came from an ancient retrovirus that infected our ancestors millions of years ago. Over time, it got incorporated into the mammalian genome and evolved to play this crucial role in pregnancy.
That is wild. So these viruses, they're not all bad news, I guess. It's like that saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger.
Evolution is full of surprises like that. Things that were once harmful can become essential for life as we know it. Makes you wonder what other secrets are hiding in our DNA, right, Shay?
Totally. Okay, so we've been talking a lot about how our genes work together, like this cooperative team. But I remember the excerpt also mentioned that there's competition going on at the genetic level, too, and that this competition actually helps drive evolution. How does that work?
It's like this, right? Our genes are definitely working together to make a body that functions. But there are often different versions of the same gene, what we call alleles, and these alleles are all competing for a spot on the team in the next generation.
So it's like different players trying out for the same position on a sports team. Only the best ones get picked.
Perfect analogy. And this competition happens because some alleles might be slightly better suited to a particular environment than others. Like maybe one allele gives you a little bit more resistance to a certain disease or helps you digest certain foods a bit better.
And those small advantages can really add up over time, right? Like if you're less likely to get sick or you can eat a wider variety of foods, you're more likely to survive and have babies.
Exactly. And so over time, the beneficial alleles become more and more common in a population, while the alleles that aren't so helpful, they slowly fade away. That's basically natural selection in action.
It's like this constant game of genetic musical chairs. Different versions of genes are constantly competing for a spot in the next generation.
Love that. And it's this back and forth, this cooperation and competition at the same time that has led to the incredible diversity of life on Earth.
It's crazy to think about all the things that had to happen at the genetic level just for us to be here today.
Right. It really makes you appreciate the power of evolution, how it can shape life in these amazing and sometimes totally unpredictable ways.
Speaking of unpredictable, we were talking earlier about all the freaky ways parasites can manipulate their hosts. Like, I'm still thinking about that cockroach and the wasp. Are there any other examples of this kind of manipulation that are just as mind-blowing?
Oh, there are tons. But one that always gets me is the emerald cockroach wasp. I mean, the name itself sounds pretty ominous, right?
Emerald cockroach wasp. Okay, that definitely sounds like something out of a horror movie. What's the story with this one?
So this wasp, it stings the cockroach twice. First in the thorax, which basically paralyzes the cockroach's front legs, and then get this, it stings the cockroach in a very specific part of its brain.
The brain. Why the brain? I mean, that just seems cruel.
It's all part of the wasp's master plan. This second sting, it doesn't kill the cockroach. It just injects this venom that completely changes the cockroach's behavior.
So the cockroach is still alive, but now it's basically a zombie under the control of this wasp venom.
That's exactly it. The venom takes away the cockroach's escape reflex. It becomes super docile, almost like a pet. And get this, the wasp can actually lead the cockroach around by its antenna.
You're kidding. Like it's walking the cockroach around on a leash.
It sounds crazy, I know. But that's exactly what happens. The wasp then leads the cockroach back to its burrow, lays an egg on the cockroach's abdomen, and seals the burrow shut.
Oh, I think I can guess what happens next. The egg hatches and the baby wasp gets a nice, fresh cockroach meal.
You got it. It's pretty gruesome for the cockroach, but hey, that's nature for you. It's a perfect example of how parasites can manipulate their hosts to make sure their own babies survive.
Okay, that one is just disturbing. It makes you wonder how much manipulation is going on out there that we have no idea about.
Right. It's kind of a creepy thought, but also amazing at the same time. Nature is full of these complex and often ruthless relationships.
Definitely makes you think twice about what's really going on in the world around us. But you know, we've been focusing a lot on these parasitic relationships. But the excerpt also mentioned that sometimes parasites might actually seem to benefit their hosts.
Yeah, there are cases where a parasite's presence might seem to give the host an advantage. But it's important to remember that even in those situations, the parasite is always looking out for number one.
So what might look like a win-win for the host could actually be a subtle form of manipulation.
Exactly. It's all about perspective. Like, remember those flukes that can infect snails?
Oh yeah, those were weird. Didn't they make the snail's shells thicker or something? Seemingly a good thing for the snail.
Exactly. A thicker shell would make the snail less likely to get eaten by a predator, right? But building a thicker shell takes a lot of energy and resources.
Ah, so the snail is paying a price for that extra protection.
Yep. And that price is usually paid in terms of babies. The snail can't make as many offspring because it's putting all its energy into building that thicker shell, all thanks to the parasite.
So even though the snail is tougher, it's actually less successful at passing on its genes because of the parasite. That's sneaky.
It's a perfect example of how a parasite can manipulate its host in subtle ways, even if it looks like it's helping on the surface.
Definitely a reminder to look beyond the surface and think about what's really going on in these complex relationships.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Nature is just full of these hidden connections and surprises. It's what makes studying it so fascinating.
This whole conversation has really been eye-opening. I feel like I'm seeing the world in a whole new way now.
I know what you mean. It's amazing to think about how these microscopic interactions can shape the grand scheme of things.
Speaking of grand schemes, We've covered a lot of ground today. Symbiotic relationships, mind-controlling parasites, the idea that our genes are basically a type of verticovirus. It's a lot to take in.
It's been quite the journey.
But before we get too lost in the vastness of it all, I think we need to pause for a moment and let all this information sink in. We'll be back soon to continue our deep dive. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on this wild ride exploring how our bodies are more like ecosystems than individual entities, and how our genes are almost like, I don't know, a super cooperative team working to keep us alive and reproducing.
Yeah, it really makes you rethink that whole concept of self, doesn't it? Like, where do we even begin if so much of who we are is shaped by all these tiny things working together inside us?
It's mind-boggling, and I feel like things get even more complicated when you throw viruses into the mix.
Right. I mean, we usually think of viruses as the bad guys, but as we've been talking about, they've actually had a huge impact on shaping who we are today.
Totally. Like that example of syncytin still blows my mind that a gene from a virus is now crucial for something as basic as pregnancy in mammals.
It really shows you how evolution can take something that seems totally random, like a viral infection, and turn it into something essential for life. It's like evolution is the ultimate recycler.
Talk about making lemonade out of lemons. It really underscores the fact that we're all connected, even to viruses, like part of this giant web of life.
Yeah, it's a humbling thought, and it makes you realize how much we still don't know. Like, who knows what other surprises are lurking in our DNA just waiting to be discovered.
I know. It's like our genomes are these uncharted territories full of hidden treasures.
Definitely. It's an exciting time to be studying genetics, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, so we've talked about how our genes work together to build and maintain our bodies. But the excerpt also mentioned this idea of competition happening at the genetic level and how this competition actually helps drive evolution forward. Can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure. So, yeah, all our genes are basically on the same team, right? They want the organism to survive and reproduce. But at the same time, there are often different versions of the same gene. We call these alleles. And these alleles, they're all competing for a spot on the team in the next generation.
So it's like different versions of the same player, all trying to prove they're the best one for the job. Like, who gets to be the starting quarterback?
Exactly. And this competition exists because some alleles might give an organism a slight advantage in a particular environment. Like maybe one allele makes you a little bit better at fighting off a certain disease, or maybe it helps you digest certain foods more efficiently.
And those small differences, they can really add up over time, right? Like being a little bit healthier or a little bit better at finding food, that can make the difference between surviving long enough to have babies or, well, not.
Absolutely. And so over time, those beneficial alleles, they become more and more common in the population, while the alleles that aren't so helpful, they gradually disappear. It's survival of the fittest, playing out at the genetic level.
It's like a constant game of genetic musical chairs, different versions of genes battling it out for a spot in the next generation.
Love it. And it's this interplay between cooperation and competition happening at the same time that has led to all the amazing diversity we see in the world around us.
It's incredible, really. So much happening behind the scenes, all these complex processes that have shaped who we are today.
Right. It makes you appreciate the power of evolution, how it can take these tiny differences and over vast amounts of time create all this incredible variety and complexity.
And speaking of variety, earlier we were talking about how important genetic diversity is for a species to survive.
Oh yeah, that's key. The more genetic diversity a species has, the better its chances of adapting to whatever challenges come its way,
Right.
whether it's a changing climate, a new disease, or even something we can't even imagine yet.
So it's like having a diverse toolbox. You're more likely to have the right tool for the job, no matter what the job is.
Exactly. A species with low genetic diversity is kind of like putting all its eggs in one basket. If something changes in the environment and that one basket isn't suited for it anymore, well, the whole species could be in trouble.
It's a good reminder that we need to protect biodiversity, not just for the sake of all the amazing plants and animals out there, but also for our own survival.
Absolutely. We're all interconnected in more ways than we realize.
This whole conversation has really been a journey. From the microscopic world of our genes to the vast scale of evolution, it's been amazing to explore all these ideas with you.
I've loved it. It's always fun to dive deep into these fascinating topics.
Me too. But I think we've given our listeners a lot to ponder for now. Before we wrap things up completely, though, I wanted to touch on that big question the excerpt posed. The idea that our genes are essentially a highly cooperative form of verticovirus.
Yeah, that's a real head scratcher, isn't it? But I think it's a really powerful way to look at things. It forces us to question those boundaries we put up between self and other, and to recognize just how intertwined we are with everything around us.
It also makes you wonder about free will, right? Like, if our genes are these tiny entities all working together for their own survival, then do we really have any control over our own lives? Or are we just puppets dancing to the tune of our DNA?
The age-old nature versus nurture debate. It's a big one, and there's no easy answer. But I think it's important to remember that our genes aren't our destiny. They give us a starting point, but our environment, our experiences, and our choices all play a role in shaping who we are.
So it's not like we're robots programmed by our genes. We have the ability to learn, adapt, and make decisions that can change the course of our lives.
Exactly. And that's part of what makes us human, right? That capacity for self-awareness, for creativity, for choosing our own path.
It's a reassuring thought. It means we do have some agency in our own lives.
Definitely. And it reminds us that even though we're shaped by our evolutionary history, we're not limited by it. We have the power to create our own future, both as individuals and as a species.
Well, on that hopeful note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. We've explored a lot of complex and mind-blowing ideas today, but I think the main takeaway is that life is incredibly interconnected. From the tiniest viruses to the most complex organisms, we're all part of this amazing web of relationships that makes life on Earth possible.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And I hope our listeners will continue to explore these ideas and ask questions about the world around them.
That's what the deep dive is all about. So keep questioning, keep learning.